All right. Welcome everyone. Hopefully you're doing well. We've got the beautiful wheel spinning as always. How's it going, Red Octane? Uncle P, Ronin Beats, Bobby Lasers is in here, Grimy Duck Beats. Hopefully you guys are all doing well. I see most of you feel like you're pretty happy with your beat submission so far. Joe, how's it going? Except my cat is staring me down like he's gonna kill me. See, this is why I don't trust cats. If I get an animal, it's gonna be a dog, because he will love me and kiss me whenever I feel down. Mike is sounding good. Thank you, Red Octane. We're already on the same page here. Let's quickly do an audio test to see if that's sounding good. If that does sound good, we will get the show on the road. John Sherby's here. How's it going, John? That is a good question, actually. What is the main VST everyone uses for like the core sounds in their beats? Rainfall, hello. Audio's good, excellent. I just made a beat, I think it was yesterday. Yeah, it was yesterday. And I used Scorch as the main sound. And yeah, I think Scorch is, I know I talked about it like last stream, but it's a very, very good plugin for beat making. Most other plugins I feel like are more EDM or dance music or electronic music oriented. Just have tons of sounds in them that just don't really fit the beat making soundscape that you commonly need. I think with Scorch, it's one of the first plugins I've ever used where it feels like every single sound is made for beat making. Definitely happy that I have that in my library. Used a lot of Arcade. I mean, technically that is a sampling tool, but we'll accept it. I used Flex and Purity. I've heard a lot about Purity. What exactly is Purity good for? Flex for simple pianos and Purity for guitars and bells. Okay. Chromophone 3. I've never even heard of Chromophone. I still pay for Arcade and always forget about it these days. Yeah, I'm the same way. I had Arcade for a very long time, but I wanted to move away from sampling since I already felt like it was my strength, and I wanted to like push myself to make more original pieces, so I unsubscribed from Arcade, although I will still say that it's one of the best, if not the best plugin that you can probably buy as a beat maker. That has tons of sounds for like every genre, and it's just so much fun to use as an actual sampler. I will say I love Arcade. Yeah, with Chromophone a lot of the sounds don't really fit. Flex is always good for sure, nice for soundscapes. Interesting. Purity has natural sounding sounds and tons of instruments. Interesting. Maybe I should look into that, because I do feel my library currently is a bit lacking with natural sounds. It's always a struggle with a lot of beat makers, just the stock stuff that a lot of people use, as well as a lot of the common recommendations of like Nexus and Omnisphere. While they do have great sounds, a lot are oriented towards electronic dance music. I used a lot of Contact or Massive X. Contact's another one that like, so with Contact, pardon my ignorance here, but it highly depends on like which extension libraries you buy, right? The Contact itself doesn't have all the sounds you need. You sort of need to pick and choose and buy the additional sound packs or extension, or the whatever it's called, the sound banks. Saltly Sean, how's it going? Well, for effects, never used a VST from them. AAS, interesting. I will take a look into Purity though, if it does have good natural sounds. It's something that I'm in the market for right now. Omnisphere is mostly EDM and horror sounds. You know what? Those horror sounds are fun to use sometimes. Oh my God, we haven't had the wheel on the screen. I apologize there. I apologize, wheel. Please forgive us, for we know not what we do. All right, so let's just go ahead and start the show here. As you guys know, I limited myself to Arcade note kits. Fair enough. All right, Joe, I respect it. the name of the game is we spin the wheel and then we take a listen to the beat. Everyone in the community, feel free to share your thoughts and opinions on the beat. And we'll just review these suckers one by one. The ones that don't get reviewed during the stream will get a follow-up email within the next 2 weeks from either Red Octane or Karasama. Very, very knowledgeable gentlemen. Could not run this stream without them. Evan, how's it going? And so yeah, if I don't get to your reviews, they definitely will. And based on what everyone in the Discord says, I mean, they are extremely good at their job and are very knowledgeable and very helpful with their feedback. And so we should have a Red Octane Karasama Day where we just celebrate their life and their love for us all with the reviews. Let's just spin though. Enough of this. Come on, this is what we're here for. We spinning on Grimy Duck Beats. Okay. He is the first winner. The wheel has chosen you, Grimy. Let's take a listen to your beat right here. We're jumping in Benny the Butcher type beat. Here we go. All right, that was Grimy Duck's beat there. Poison, 90 BPM. Benny the Butcher, Flea Lord type beat. Love the sound selection. This definitely fits the grimy moniker. Can hear Onyx shouting over this. Drums are awesome, great sounds. Love the dark style for sure, but it feels like some of the notes on the top line melody may be out of time in an awkward way. Don't know how to explain it. I could definitely see Freddie Gibbs on something like this too, along with Benny. Definitely dark, grimy New York vibes. Could do with a little variation, says Bobby Lasers. So my takeaway with this beat is that what jumped out to me first was the drum work was really great on this. I think there's a lot of good attention to detail in that it sounded like Grimy used multiple hi-hats to build the drum pattern, and also paid close attention to using multiple velocities to really make it feel like a complete cohesive drum break, and a good choice of the different textures as well, because it did definitely all meld together. I would have liked to use the filter to create some variation. An extra little bridge section would have worked perfectly there. Like a state of trance. Delag, you're always late, young man. I'm gonna have to start to create a hard cutoff, because it does mess things up if I start adding stuff throughout the stream. So yeah, I'm gonna start creating a hard cutoff. If you aren't able to submit before 11 a.m., I'll include yours this time, a Delag, but if you're not able to make it, you'll still get your beat reviewed, but it just won't be on stream, just to actually get you guys to commit and submit your beat. So yeah, the drum work was great on this. I really love that weird atonal bellish sound that was used. I'm always for something that just sounds unique and different and interesting, and I think Grimy did a phenomenal job of introducing some layer in here that really stands out and sets this beat apart from like a more typical beat. It can be sometimes scary to use these types of weird sounds, because it feels like, well, maybe some people won't like this, but I think that exact same sentiment can be why some people feel like this is a very special beat, because you start using these very strange, unique sounds and textures in the beat. And I just love this one personally. I might have pushed it a bit further back. So just because you love a texture and you want it to really, you want the audience member, the person who's listening to your beat, to like hear your cool little idea in it. At times it can still be a good idea to push it further back and not make it as primary in the beat. You can only have so many sounds in the spotlight. That's something that I say in the chorus. And you sort of do need to make sure that the core sounds of your beat are the ones that are a little bit more upfront, and try to make everything more secondary, even if you happen to love it. The new version of the course talks more about this, which I am excited to put out. I'm going to be filming it next week, and then it's going to be a couple months, probably going to launch in sometime in November. You guys are going to get the updates for free, all the new videos, everything. So yeah, super excited to put that out. Anyways, back to the beat once again. So yeah, I would have pushed that sound a bit further back. And I think the biggest thing that jumped out to me, could have used a little bit more fixing, is that the guitar pattern that was used in this beat could have used a little bit of simplification. It felt like the pattern that was built here was very sort of sporadic. It didn't really have a loop feeling, in that I didn't really understand what it was providing in the beat, just because it was constantly doing something new and unique. Maybe, I don't know if it was like an 8-bar loop or something, but it didn't really feel like the pattern that was built here emoted anything. It just felt like a series of complex notes and a way to like catch your attention, but not really say anything, if that makes sense. So I probably would have created a lot more of a simple pattern that actually resonates some feeling, and just looped it. So once again, one of the big trappings is this feeling of wanting to make super complex patterns, but in my opinion, just creating simple ideas that really convey something and just looping them is enough to make your beat sound great. I mean, there's a reason why every single phenomenal beat that you've heard in hip hop is probably just like a 2 or 4 bar loop. So don't feel compelled to make something extremely long and complex, and don't feel afraid to be simple. I mean, a lot of people who make beats and sell them say the simple beats is what sells best, and a lot of the times that just means a simplification of the patterns in a lot of the ways, and not creating some super complex rhythmic crazy pattern where the rapper has a hard time using it just because so many of the instruments are just doing so much. Again, one of the things that I mentioned in the course is that the more movement a sound has, the more the listener is going to pay attention to it. And so if I'm a rapper and I'm trying to really express myself on your beat and make sure that like I'm the focal point, if I'm combating against like a guitar that's just going crazy, like it's going to be hard for that rapper to feel like, you know what, my performance on this doesn't really feel like it's shining. It's not really standing out, and I'm not sure why. A lot of the times it's because the beat is just demanding too much attention, or maybe just one layer in the beat. So that's one thing I would say as well. I feel that the organ didn't really sit well. There were parts in the beat where you pitched up the notes. I think it was like 2 semitones. I felt like that really did not fall in line with what everything else was doing, so I think that was just a bit of a mistake. But also where it sat in the beat was a little bit strange. It seems like that organ, I think it's like the very first sound that we hear in the beat. So it starts in a good place here, but once all the other sounds come in, it feels to me that, I'm not sure whether, again, it's my setup, but there's some pretty extreme panning where it goes pretty hard. So it feels very, very wide. And again, this is the section where we have those 2 pitched up notes that don't quite feel right. Oftentimes, if you're gonna, for your main sounds, the core central sounds like this organ, you do want it to be a little bit closer to the middle. You don't want extremely wide panning. Oftentimes extremely wide panning is good for maybe the smaller supplemental sounds. So even that cool little bell sound that you had, if you push it way back and then you use some small panning left and right in the extremes, that might be the sound that you want to use to fill up the stereo space. But oftentimes using a very core sound like this and only pushing it to the extreme left or right, in my opinion, that isn't going to be a good way to use your sounds, and it can be a little bit distracting. So definitely a lot of cool sounds in here. Great sound selection, great core idea. I think where some of the sounds sat and a little bit of overcomplication hurt the beat a little bit. So this is something that I've talked about before. When you first start making beats, you can only make simple ideas, and then as you get better and better and better, you start to have the ability to create really complex ideas and add a lot into your beat, and you get super excited and you want everything to sort of stand out. Then you realize that you need to pare everything down, and you go back into a simplification, but with a lot better judgment of, here are the sounds that I need, and then here's all the secondary sounds that can add as small details. So I think Grimy, what I would say at this point is think about how you can simplify some of those patterns and push sounds to be a little bit more secondary, just to feel like there's a simplification. I think that would really benefit this beat especially. I spread out the stereo width a bit to make space for that bellish sound. So yeah, I think if you took the bellish sound and you pushed it further back, because to me, I guess it's either one or the other. Like, it seems like you wanted both of those sounds to be very primary and very up close and in your face, for both of those sounds to be the POI. In my opinion, I think you need to make a choice of one or the other, and then choose which one you're going to push back and be a little bit less in focus and less central, and which one you're going to sort of make more primary. In my opinion, yeah, I don't think that the use of stereo space is a good way to control your POI. Oftentimes it's going to be through frequency and depth, just because of beat making overall, it's not often that you put very core important sounds in the extreme left or right or very wide. You'll notice with a lot of beats, everything's a little bit more narrow, a little bit more closer into the middle. So yeah, I think that's hopefully that makes sense. My girl needs to wake up so I can turn my monitors on. Didn't even notice that. Do I have bars? Absolutely not. I do not have bars. I remember me and my friends used to go on MSN and send freestyles to each other. This is like grade 7 or 8. And then I caught one of my friends copying and pasting a DMX verse because I had heard it before. I was like, what's this guy doing? And then I called him out, and I never freestyled over MSN with him again. Anyways, let me quickly see Deleg here. You rascal. I'll add you into the file, and then we'll jump to the next beat here. Grimy, let's put you in yellow. Deleg, let's add you to the wheel, and then we will spin this beautiful, beautiful wheel. Where we landed? Ooh, DMX tree. Or is this Dimitri? Dimitri. Is this a cool way of spelling Dimitri? I don't know. Let's listen to the beat though, everyone. All right, that was Dimitri's beat. I was right about the name. Very ethereal, reverby beat. Cool. All right, let's shut her down. Let's highlight you. And let's put the wheel back up on. Hey, why isn't it spinning? Why is the wheel not Spin for me, please. All right. This sounds beautiful. It's like space, smooth. I wasn't sure in the beginning where it's headed. Great chill vibe. Red Octane, you said something here that's pretty spot on with what I said. I feel like all the sounds are pushed quite far back. It may be intentional, but not much of a POI. Rainfall, this is pretty cool. Drums are kind of offbeat or something, but the sound selection is awesome. Feels a bit empty at times, very chill beat, putting me back to sleep. I like this beat. It is very mellow, like the drum pattern, a bit repetitive, but nice vibe. Love how that synth panned ear to ear. Great chill vibes, but the auto pan of one of the background sounds is very regular and a bit monotone. Also, the snare is quite rough for the rest of the beat. So yeah, what I would say is that this beat was constructed in a very particular way. So I think the drum work on here was great. I like the drum textures, the multiple snares and the hats. I also think it's pretty impressive. You did a great job of programming all the different layers and the patterns, like the subtle strings, and getting them to actually sound like real strings. That can be very challenging often. I know that's something that I struggle with, because it's very easy to get your strings to sound like very cheesy and from an actual like stock piano or stock plugin. But I think Dimitri did a great job of using the right textures and programming them in a way that felt very natural and felt like an actual sort of symphonic feel. The guitar in here, the small vocal samples, I think everything was programmed really well in terms of the actual patterns that were built and the sounds that were used. But I do definitely agree with what the chat is saying, in that there's this pretty big difference between, like, the drums are very powerful and up front, and then everything else was pushed way back and very, very floaty. And so we really have just two layers here, and I think it would have helped this beat if there was some other layer that was sort of sitting in between, that was, again, the POI, the focus, because as of right now, it felt like the instrumentation was just a very big blur of sounds. Again, they were programmed very well, but nothing really stood out to me. After listening to this beat, I can't really think back to, oh, that one sound that really hooked me and really grabbed me, just because everything was made to feel like a big wall of sound behind the drums. And I think that's also part of the reason why a lot of people said the drums felt a little bit loud and felt like it's because those are the only sounds that are up close in terms of the depth, and everything else was very pushed back. So I think if you're going to take one of the sounds and really program it in a way and push the sound to be a little bit more upfront, a little bit less floaty, so it sort of hooks the person that's listening and we get a good sense of like what the beat is all about, I think that would have really helped the beat. And fundamentally, I think that is the biggest sort of adjustment that needs to be made to this beat, which is creating a POI. And whether you take one of the sounds that already exists in the beat and you sort of push it around and sort of take the reverb off, bring on more high frequencies to really bring it more up front, make it a little bit more loud so it feels more up front. There's a lot of different strategies that I mentioned in the course about how to control depth and get it to be removed from that big wall of sound that's a little bit more ethereal in the background. I think that could have definitely been a big game changer for this beat. Sean says, I love the little nuances in the beat and things like the bass build-up and the halfway point, I believe, sound organic as well. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of things that this beat did well in terms of the actual technique used to program, and the sort of sophistication with a lot of the sounds in terms of like the vocal sample sounding great with where it's at. I think it just needed that one extra sound, maybe it already exists in this beat, that really helps drive the beat and sort of creates that bridge between the drum sitting up front and everything else being a blur in the back. So let's spin. All right. Who's next? Is it Uncle Pierre Deleg? Ooh! Oh! Those close calls are what I live for, everyone. We should start gambling. We should start a gambling stream on who's going to get chosen. Deleg, you came late, but you got lucky here. Hey, these guys kind of look like me. That was Deleg's beat there. Well done to Deleg. Love that filter. It's not overly repetitive, and the changes up a lot, which I love. Says Ronan Beats. Tight, crisp drums. So yeah, with this beat, what did I write here? Let me just finish this sentence. So yeah, I think Deleg shows a lot of great techniques here. John Sherby says great sound selection and sequencing. Yeah, a lot of great techniques in this beat. For example, one of the things that we just talked about earlier, there's that very, very small bell pattern that was in this beat. Instead of, cramming it and making it sound so super obvious and upfront, it was used as just a small little detail, and it probably took Deleg, a long time to find that sound and program it, and yet he just still had the discipline to tuck it away and make it non-primary in the beat and just make it a small little detail. And I think a lot of sounds in this beat had that very good discipline, which is good to see. I think Deleg has made a lot of progression with choosing good sounds and really being disciplined with how loud they are and how upfront they are. Red Octane says, I feel the arrangement is teasing me a bit. Feels like it never fully built up. As I get into the groove of the bridge comes back in. Great beat for sure though. Love that vocal in the string. Smooth beat, but it kind of missing some elements. So yeah, overall great sound selection, great programming. I think what feels a little bit off, I don't know if Deleg, you've ever tried adding vocals onto the beat. I think that would really help you in this scenario, because this beat overall feels like it tilted towards a very, very bright frequency space. The hi-hats were pretty piercing and pretty loud. I think if you tried adding vocals onto this, it would jump out to you how much the beat is sort of tilting towards a higher frequency spectrum, and I think there's a little bit of missing presence in the low mid. So what I would advise is start playing around with adding vocals onto the beat just so you understand whether or which sounds sort of are getting in the way of the vocal performance and which spaces still need to be filled. I also felt like the 808, I'm not sure whether that was just on my end, but the 808 felt like it was sitting in a little bit of a higher frequency. So yeah, I think it's hard to really say what was missing in this beat because you actually did program a lot of the sounds very well. I think the strings were the sort of focal point in the beat, and they should be sitting in the right spaces. I think just a lot of the very loud, prominent sounds tilted towards the higher frequency spectrum, and maybe once you added the mastering effects to get the beat a little bit more loud, that maybe got exaggerated. So did you use a kick at all, Red Octane says, or was it just very subby? So yeah, I don't know if Deleg is still here, but I'm very interested to hear what he has experienced using vocal samples, because I think that would help you make decisions on which sounds in your beat you want to be a little bit more loud, because I think the hi-hats here were a little bit overbearing, and you might realize that certain sounds need to be brought up in terms of their presence. I would assume in this beat it might be the low mid, but it's hard to hear from the first listen. So yeah, hopefully a vocal sample can help you determine that. Let's spin. So I guess the wheel doesn't keep spinning once you start it. That's sad. Oh, we got Red Octane here. Cora, the man himself. Last time he had that cool dubstep track at 90 BPM. I don't foresee this being dubstep, but let's take a listen. Cora beats, as always. Crushing it. That was an awesome beat there. Let's see what the chat is saying. The man, the myth, the legend. Menacing in a good way. Love the drums. Cool switch up. The odd pad sounds may be too loud listening again, says Red Octane. Great movement and variation. Sounds too repetitive, says Ronan Beats. So what my takeaway was obviously not mega into the GoldenEye N64 lead bell sound. Fire, those brassy synths are a cool detail. That was nasty, says Evan. But that's personal preference. So yeah, I didn't have a problem with the sounds themselves. I really like the sound selection in this beat. I'm partial to really unique, menacing beats like this that have that sort of dark, evil energy. Really awesome job with the sound selection, in my opinion. I really loved it. Amazing percussion sounds as well. That brass that was in the beat was programmed very well. The arrangement that you sort of came up with was very fun. It was a lot of switch ups, very non-traditional. Good choice in the sound swap. So partway through, Cora introduced a different sound into the beat, and I think it went very well. There's a great fluid transition from one sound to another, primarily because the sound swapping was the sounds really shared a lot of the same characteristics, so it wasn't as if the new sound that was brought in suddenly had like a completely different depth and stereo space and frequency space. They shared a lot of similarities, which is why that switch up worked so flawlessly. That brassy synth accent, the bells the brassy synth accent the bells really well. Didn't even think about it as a GoldenEye sound. That's all I'm going to hear now. There's a sort of maximalist approach, and I think Red Octane, you mentioned that pad sound may be too loud. The beat was maximal very much throughout the entire arrangement, except for that part where you switched up to the new bell sound. I'm not entirely sure whether, I think I just have a good idea for the next assignment, which is I would really like to hear what Red Octane would do if you did not have the ability to do a lot of switch ups and you were stuck doing a very traditional 16-bar verse, 8-bar hook, and try to make your beat that way. So maybe that's going to be the next assignment that we do. I'll have to think about it, but I'm pretty sure you've made a very traditional arrangement before, and I think you've done it really well. But we talk about it here and there, but I haven't really sat down with you in full in terms of like what's the next step. And I think if the idea is to start working with artists, very avant-garde and very sort of experimental arrangements can at times be something that turns artists off, but I'm pretty sure you know this. So yeah, I think that'd be a cool idea. Nonetheless, really love this beat. Shows that Red Octane, that's the reason why he's one of the people who reviews beats, because as you guys heard, a lot of quality to his beats, a lot of experience under his belt making phenomenal beats. And it's only been making beats for less than 3 years, I think, now. Very impressive. Kaiza is the next beat we're going to be listening to. Kaiza cannot believe his luck. Here we go.
Damn, slice it up, Ron.
All right, that was a Ronan Beats, who's in the chat. Thank you to Ronan for submitting that beat called Istanbul. He says he can't even remember his beat. Yeah, he's been making beats or Red Octane's been making beats for less than 2 years, which is crazy to me because my beats sounded like junk after 2 years. That background piano is beautiful. Oh my god, the 808 is so bad. 808s are my big problem. I think it feels that way because it's missing the low mid presence, just the high end and bass. I think it clips quite extremely into distortion. I did catch that as well. There are parts where I can't tell where the bar begins and ends, if that makes sense. Definitely clips a bit. So yeah, I think Ronan with this beat here, cool idea. I like the pianos as well. The sort of core sounds that you used for this beat were enjoyable. I think I really love that piano, the sort of ethereal feeling to this sort of beat. Ronan says he's only been making beats for 10 months now. So I think regardless of some of the things about like the clipping and the 808, I think the biggest thing that I would say is just focus on creating a 4-bar loop or a 2-bar loop and just being a little bit conventional. So one of the things that Joe mentioned here is where he has a hard time figuring out where the bar begins and ends. So I think a big part of the reason why is because you went very, very avant-garde and experimental with your drum pattern. It's hard to sort of say, we had percussion sounds as your snares and your snare, or sorry, as the sort of, yeah, the clap, and like the clap is sitting on the 3 and there was no kick on the 1. So what I mentioned in the course is start by putting a kick on the 1, a snare on the 2 and the 4. By no means should you be stuck with this every single time you make a beat. You can definitely switch it up, but I will say when you first start out, it's not going to be a good idea to use your drums as a very avant-garde instrument. That's something that I definitely did when I first started. I wanted to be super crazy and out there with every single sound that I could, that I used in my beat. But the way drums should be programmed, at least when you start out, should be very conventional. One of the things that I always say is to break the rules, you need to learn them first. There's a reason why hip hop, the 99% of beats have the snare on the 2 and the 4 and a kick on the 1. It's because that's going to provide a good backbone, a very steady structure, and a very understandable format that the audience can hear. And so I got the same feeling as Joe, which is I had sort of a hard time hearing when the loop starts and ends because it didn't necessarily feel like the drums were programmed in a way that helped the listener understand what was happening. Moritz, good to see you. That's usually what you do. I guess you tried to switch it up here, but I think that was a big reason why the beat didn't really come together. You mentioned that you struggle with 808s. It might be the 808 library that you have. You might just be unhappy with the textures themselves because it sounds like you really cranked up the volume of the 808 because you were unhappy with maybe the way it sat in the beat. Oftentimes it can be a good idea to just find an 808 that sounds okay and start playing with distortion a little bit more subtly. Pay attention to the frequency distribution and make sure you don't end up completely like lopsiding the 808. But I would say in terms of overall balance, one of the things that I advocate for, which a lot of people don't, is adding a limiter onto your master just to make sure that the exact thing that happened in this beat doesn't happen, which is that extreme distortion once the 808 kicks in. You'll find that you'll have this sort of feeling of wanting to crank up the 808 because you're not happy with it. And oftentimes it's not a volume issue, it's the frequency distribution and which pockets of frequency the 808 actually fills up. And so when you just crank up the volume and you go past the 0 decibel threshold, you might think that you're helping the beat and the 808 sound full, and then when you export it and you put it onto SoundCloud, all of a sudden you get these very ugly frequencies and you realize the 808 volume was the issue. it was the actual frequencies that it sits in. So I would also maybe recommend exploring alternative bass sounds. You don't have to just be stuck with 808s. They are in right now. Everyone uses them. But maybe your style is more conducive towards acoustic basses or electric basses or upright basses. I would really advocate for exploring different bass types and seeing if that might be something that you feel sits well with your beat style. And maybe that's the reason why you don't feel as if your 808s sit right, because they might not be the actual sound that you actually want to use, and you never know until you start exploring. So I have a full YouTube video on different types of basses that you can use in your beats, so that might be a good starting point. Going back and hitting the basics in the right order is always a good thing, as Bobby said, never too late. Grimy just started this year at 29 years old. Congratulations. I also have trouble telling when things are clipping in FL. So yeah, that's why I recommend adding the limiter onto your master, because it gives you a very clear indication. You can see it right on that graph whether something's going over. And I will say, if something goes over very, very briefly, like a snare or a kick, you might be able to get away with it. It's not going to instantly make your beat sound horrible, just because those small, quick, transient sounds might not like create that ugliness for a prolonged enough time where it's perceivable. But with something like an 808, like that's going to last, each 808 note's going to last for a very long time in your beat, and so every single time it hits, it's going to be obvious if there's going to be distortion. So yeah, I think what Red Octane mentioned, if they're going past 0 decibels when looking at the meter, it's clipping. Also, a soft clipper on the master is a godsend. So yeah, I think soft clipping, from my understanding, it's not as hard of a ceiling as limiters are. So putting a soft clipper before a limiter and really playing around with, because fundamentally what the soft clipper is it's a compression tool. It's a saturator, and so what it'll do is help ideally balance out how loud the loudest sounds are, and then bring those down, and then take the quieter sounds and bring those up, so you get a little bit more of an even beat overall. So yeah, that soft clipping tool can definitely catch some of those higher peaks and squash them down. But just in case, maybe throw a limiter just as a sort of double check to see if the soft clipper is helping you with that issue. Evan says, I'm learning theory piano and taking this course, so a lot of learning and undoing what I learned over the years. 29 is still young buck status in his book. Definitely. I'm an old geezer too, Evan, don't worry. I have a soft clipper on the master, but I'll start adding a limiter. So yeah, I think what might have happened is that the soft clipper just didn't catch enough of those peaks and squash them down enough, or maybe you turn the gain up on the soft clipper too high, and so those peaks, while they did get squashed down, the overall level of the beat went back up, and then you had those frequencies going over 0 decibels again. Always hard unlearning bad habits. Thank you very much, Red Octane. I'm glad that my channel has helped you out, and hopefully the course has helped you guys out too. All right, here we go. Oh wait, I was gonna choose the beat myself, but that would have been sacrilegious for me to believe that I had the same power as the wheel. What a fool I am. Ooh, it's gonna be Jinzu. Sorry, Joe. You missed out by a hair. Jinzu's beat coming up. That was Jinzu's beat there. Interesting style there, Jinzu. All right. Let's see what everyone's saying here. Dimitri, good to have you here. Thank you for submitting your beat. All the pieces are there for sure. Oh, yeah, that was for Dimitri's beat. I think I struggle with the same thing. The POI can be hard as there are a lot of different cool sounds. So this one quote, I can't remember who said it, but it's create drunk but edit sober. I think that's the way it goes. I might be butchering that quote, but the idea is like when you first start making the beat, you know, add as many cool sounds and what have you, and be okay with overcrowding the beat if you want. But when you edit, you sort of need to be very deliberate, and you need to make hard decisions in terms of which sounds you want to include and which sounds you want to take away, because there are times when there's a really cool, awesome sound that you worked really hard on, and you really love the way it sounds, but maybe just saving it for the hook is what you have to do, or maybe pushing it further back so it's not as primary and prominent because the other core sounds are much more important. That's when you have to make those hard decisions, and that's a tough part of beat making, which is you have to pare down all your creative ideas and really be ruthless in terms of which ones you want to keep. So I think this idea of like pure creativity, add every single cool sound and idea into your beat. It might be a fun exercise for the actual creative part, but when it comes time to editing it and getting it to be a full usable beat, you're gonna have to make some hard, difficult choices. And the way that what's going to guide your choices is the same thing that I talk about, which is the POI. You need to focus on choosing 1 or 2 sounds at max that are going to be the focal point in the beat, and then you make everything more secondary. And that's one of the things that I have noted down with this beat, but we'll get to that a little bit after these comments. Really interesting sounds in here, says Grimy. Love the industrial, unique sounds. It's a little tough to find the rhythm between the drops, and the sound selection is cool as hell. I feel some of the panning is jarring though, says Red Octane. The hook was gas. Sounds are cool. Griselda vibes, but electronic. It might lack cohesion. I like the bubbly sound for some reason. The bridge sections could use some work. Throws off the groove a bit. Emmanuel makes some dark beats. Does someone need a hug? To me, I think the rapper is a missing instrument here, says John. I listen to a lot of underground and darker hip hop, so I could for sure see an artist on this felt right at home. Yeah, I definitely loved the unique textures and sounds. I think a lot of you guys are making some pretty cool, you're pointing out how cool this beat is with the sound selection. I really loved the industrial aggressive feel to this, the sort of monotony of some of the sounds, which is something that a lot of people are somewhat afraid to do. I know being very melodic and very musical is the way to go right now, but you know, these sort of overall aggressive feeling that comes with less musical patterns. Obviously there were some sounds in here that were musical because you can't have, you know, just a one note playing over and over again for every single sound. But I think the way that the beat was overall contemplated in terms of creating this aggressive driving energy was really cool. I will say the thing that hurt it at the beginning though was the snare pattern. So initially for the first section of the beat in this area here, As you guys can hear, there was no snare on the 2, it was just a snare on the 4. I think that sort of hurt the beat because this entire section up until like a minute 25, a minute 15, just felt like an intro. I think having the actual full drum pattern start a little bit earlier could have just helped the beat work a little bit more. I think it was, who was it here that mentioned that the beat just felt a little bit incomplete for a long period of time. And I think it was because in this first initial area, you have an incomplete drum pattern, and then you go down into this sort of bridge that doesn't have any rhythm whatsoever. And so for a large part of this beat, it feels very incomplete. There's just not enough momentum built, the driving energy that you want to use with your drum pattern, paired with these sort of monotonous instruments can really help you create that driving energy. But with a sort of incomplete drum pattern, the beat itself just overall feels incomplete because of that. I think another thing that I would say to Jinzu is what I just mentioned with the POI. Very, very maximal arrangement in terms of how many sounds and patterns are in here, but I do think that some editing needs to be done because it felt like everything was really in your face and very over the top, which by no means is going to be a bad thing for certain parts of the beat, but I felt that even in the verse section here, like some of those sounds that are panning hard left and right and going in and out, that are like feeling really amelodical and like wavy, you know, you can easily push those sounds into the back and make them really cool, unique details in the beat. But as the way everything is programmed right now, everything's really coming at you really up front, and I think that would probably hurt the ability for this beat to actually be used, as there's a little bit less space for an artist. I do applaud the arrangement effort, but like a lot of people mentioned, it felt like the bridge sections here, it just felt like a random assortment of sounds, which has been done and definitely can work if the artist continues to like rap and they are the rhythmic driving force. But what you could do here is simply just like find a sort of snare that's somewhat more weak, do some filtering and really push it back just so it has some persistent rhythm throughout this part here, just so the person that's listening doesn't like completely lose what's happening and sort of forgets what the beat rhythmically feels like and what the tempo and pace should be. And I think that was made a little bit more exaggerated just because this first part here, like the rhythm is very hard to catch on to, and so once again for the very first part, the first third of this beat, it just felt like there was a big lack of rhythm. So yeah, those small techniques can help, but overall I think Jinzu, really cool unique sounds in this beat, really cool voice in terms of your artistic direction, really love the dark aggressiveness. I do think that the editing needs to be done in terms of figuring out which sound you want to be the focal point of the beat and really kill your babies, as they say. You're gonna need to make some hard choices and push some sounds into the back and figure out what sound you want to be more up front. My recommendation probably would be pushing that really monotonous pad that you have throughout the entire beat. I think making that take up far less space and pushing it back, just so it's a little bit more of a secondary detail that sort of provides some framework in terms of filling up space rather than just being this very, very loud upfront sound, because as we can see in the waveform, this pad is like compressed almost to the peak here. I think this should be a very, very small waveform at this point, and then you can use the keys, the sort of melodic keys that come in and out. So those sounds, I think you could keep those up front, and sort of have that be the POI. That would be a starting point. I don't know whether the beat would end up sounding balanced. You might need to make some more adjustments, but nonetheless, having everything as close and upfront as the beat is in its current iteration, I don't think it really had enough balance. It needs a lot of rapping skills to get on that beat, I think, but overall it is a great piece of music. Yeah, definitely really cool ideas in here, really well executed sort of sound design ideas. I think just editing how loud and prominent some sounds are is the big thing, the big ticket. Who's next? Oh my god! Ooh, Z Elite. I'm sorry tonight's rain. You're probably crying and whimpering right now, but Z Elite is probably jumping for joy. Let's take a listen. That was Z Elite's beat there. Let's see what the chat is saying right now. Red Octane is stepping away. We will miss you dearly. A Phil Collins type beat. Everyone's getting crazy with the drum patterns. Sounds like something I've made before. I feel like those chords would profit from a few transitional notes to make them sound more cohesive and not so jumpy. Maybe you could invert something there. So my takeaway with this beat was once again, just like Joe mentioned, the very unconventional odd drum patterns can really be alluring when you first start up, but honestly just kick on the one snare on the two and the four, because this beat just had such a different rhythm and it just didn't really feel like it provided a consistent enough pace and a good backbone for the beat. I think the biggest thing that what I picked up on is that the strings that were used in this beat, they did not sound that great. So what we talked about earlier in one of the beats was how I think it was it Dimitri? Yeah, so I think Dimitri did a great job of programming his strings to sound very natural and very authentic. I feel like Z Elite's beat here, this sounded more towards, it came from like a stock plugin type of thing. Kind of sounds like something that would be in Pokemon Mystery Dungeon. So yeah, the sounds that were used in here sounded a little bit stock. They didn't really sound natural and acoustic, which is one of the reasons why I would advise newer producers to stay away from using strings, just because they are very hard to get to sound authentic and good. You first off need good sound banks and a probably sampled string, like a plugin that uses sampled strings, and on top of that you probably need to stack multiple different types of strings to get them to actually sound good. Oftentimes just using one string patch and using that as the core of your beat is probably going to really undermine how sophisticated your beat can sound. And that's another thing along with this beat, which is those strings were meant to be the POI. Those are the big sounds in the beat. That was like the big cornerstone. And because it sounded so stock throughout the entire beat, it didn't really feel like the beat engaged me or hooked me, just because it felt very very plain. It didn't really jump out to me as something that would ever catch my attention. The way the strings are programmed here, they're very loud and upfront, so you would sort of listen to them as if they were the POI, but there's not much movement in them. It's a very straightforward chord progression, and the sound itself isn't all that engaging and interesting. So what I would say is for Z Elite, just to be a little bit more straightforward with your drum patterns, and try to you use a lot of transient sounds in your beats, so that's something that you might want to really push yourself towards doing. The good thing about using these big strings and a lot of more sustained sounds is that they really go a long way in filling up space in your beat, and so it feels like you need to use them because you have no good way of filling your beat up otherwise. But at that point, those very strong, prominent, loud, sustaining sounds end up being a crutch. So what I'd recommend is at the beginning, push yourself to use less of these huge sounds, less very long lasting bass sounds or strings or pads, because those are ways that can fill up the beat in a very, very quick way. But if you don't have that strong backing in getting your beats to sound full without them, they'll constantly be used as a crutch. And oftentimes those aren't the types of sounds that you want to be the main focal point of your beat. So yeah, do the hard thing. Step away from using very long sustaining sounds like that, and force yourself to try to make beats using other sounds that have more shorter lasting characteristics, because I think it's going to be important in your development to not use these types of sounds as easy ways to fill up your beat fundamentally. Hopefully that makes sense. Let me know in the chat if my brain is making sense to you guys. I smoked a little bit of weed last night. I haven't smoked in like months before this, so sometimes I turn into a real fucking idiot the day after I smoke weed. Produced by Morris. Maury, it's your lucky day. We got Glory Days by Maury. Well, that was Maury's beat there. Glory Days is the name of the beat. Very, very interesting beat there. A friend of mine is a great violinist. Would any of you be interested in some loops we could record, given I manage the recording part? Interesting idea there. Is there a way to post a beat online for these assignments without posting it publicly? I'm putting my beats on SoundCloud. Would prefer to not make it public. Yeah, a lot of people submit their SoundCloud links and just put it to private so people on SoundCloud can't see it, but anyone with a link can. So if you just pop the link in the submission, you're as good as gold. So yeah, that would work. Really like the main melody riff, says Joe. I like the timbre of the horn, says Evan. And Dimitri also said that just making it unlisted on YouTube means the only people with a link can watch it. The general rhythm feels good. The brass sound not super high quality, I feel, says Grimy. Like the production as a whole, says John. Feels a little stock sounding though, but great vibe. Like, says Deleg. Agreed, says Dimitri, on the part of the brass not sounding super high quality. So yeah, my takeaway with this beat's very interesting to compare this beat with the last one. So first off, one thing that you'll notice is this beat also had a very sustained, prominent sound as well, which is that sort of main organ. I fucking hate Google Drive. It's the worst audio player. I'm going to jump around to show you the examples here. So that main riff, the da da da, like that's a very sustained, it's always playing, constantly playing throughout the beat. So much like the last beat in terms of how that used strings, very prominent, very loud, very upfront, but you'll notice later on during like the verse section, so you can see there's filtering done there, and there's another part of the arrangement as well where those sounds completely vanish. So using those sounds in a way isn't inherently a bad thing, but having it take up all the space in your beat throughout the entire beat and not programming it in a way where it starts to become a little bit more secondary, I think that's when the problem happens. Another thing with this beat that worked was that it wasn't just that sound that was sort of doing the heavy lifting for the entire beat. Morris used the brass sounds to be the POI in this beat. That's what really jumped out to probably everyone in this chat, which is those were the focal point of the beat. And so it wasn't as if that long, huge sustaining sound was, again, carrying the whole beat. And I think that's the way that using these more sustained, constantly present sounds can still provide balance in your beat if you program them the right way and you do the techniques to sort of push them in the back at times. So hopefully that makes sense. Deleg says, like the intro, main part is a bit stockish. So yeah, I think the way everything was programmed here was well done. Good use of depth, because there were certain times when the sounds were pushed back a little bit more, and so there's a good balance throughout the entire beat. The only thing that I would say is I would echo what a lot of you guys are saying, which is that main brass didn't necessarily sound that great. Brass is yet another sound, much like strings, where it can sound very stock very easily. Most likely, if you want to use brass, you'll probably have to stack multiple brass sounds on top of themselves. There's this one video, I think the YouTuber's name's Aiden Kenway. He does a breakdown of Industry Baby by, I think it's Lil Nas X. Even if you don't like that beat, it's very interesting to see how that beat was made, because that beat is driven purely by brass sounds, and they do a breakdown of just how many different brass layers are used to make that beat. You might listen to it and think, oh, that's just a normal brass sound that you hear from any other stock bank, but then when you take a listen and you watch that video, you'll see that they're just like, I don't know, there's like 3 or 4 different brass sounds all stacked on top of each other just to actually get it to sound like it's coming from an actual band. Because with these types of sounds, traditionally, if this is from a sample, it would be an actual, you know, jazz brass group that would be providing the sounds, which would consist of multiple different people playing multiple different types of instruments, all playing the same thing, to really add that level of depth to the texture. I'm just using one sound and hoping that that's going to be that's going to end up sounding natural. It's just not going to work oftentimes. Grimy says, I use Native Instruments sample-based instruments for brass and strings. They are really good. So yeah, if it's sample-based, a lot of the times what they do is they naturally stack different brass on top of each other. But yeah, let me know do you feel that they come, is it just one single brass that's playing? And if so, do you feel that it only sounds good once you start stacking multiple brass on top of each other? Because that's commonly the issue with using brass sounds and acoustic sounds in general, that are meant to be a little bit more big band or symphonic. But yeah, overall, Morris, I really like this beat. The core idea is really phenomenal. I think you did a lot of smart things. You played with the arrangement. You created a good arrangement where I understood where the verse is and where the hook is. It's just the overall texture usage. I would start playing with layering, as well as using some effects to maybe expand how much frequencies and how the character of the sounds change. That could be something you want to play with. So Grimy Duckbeat says you can adjust that in there actually. So yeah, some sounds inherently come with the ability to play with how many voices you want to add onto each sound. So that inherently just quickly lets you stack multiple sounds on top of each other just with one note, which is very, very convenient. All right. Even a single muted trumpet can sound dope in the right context. Yeah, absolutely. Let's get to spinning. Who's up? It's Dash D Beats. All right. Well done, Dash D. Well done. Let's jump in to Dash D Beats. Hangs with John is the name. All right, that was Dash D Beats. We have an outro here, which I will cut off, I think. What's gonna happen here? Let me just jump ahead. That's just the 808 there. So let's see what the chat is saying. That was a very interesting beat. Very smooth build-up, says Dimitri. Drums a little bit too quiet. Cool build-up, I agree. The 808 has an out-of-key note, I think. I thought it was going to be a cinematic beat. Very quiet. The drums are too quiet. I thought they were playing for a slow as a... I thought he was playing them slow as a build-up. Not slow, I meant quiet. Drums are really quiet. Try to bring the drums more up front by making them loud and the additional effects far away by adding some delay and reverb on them. Yeah, I think what you guys are mentioning here is exactly what I'm thinking. Really, really great programming with the actual core loop. The strings that were used here, the use of like reverb and getting them to sit in a very secondary space and the unique warping effects on them. I just loved the actual core loop that was used here and the way that it was built. So if Dash D made it himself, I think phenomenal job on that front. I love that sort of synthy glitch that would come in and out as well. So it shows a lot of unique detail throughout this entire beat in terms of the musicality. I think that was really, really well done. But just like you guys said, the big culprit here were the drums. This beat would have felt so much more full and complete with an actual drum. The drum textures were just not loud enough, and I think the way they were programmed was a little bit odd in that it sounded like throughout most of the beat, it wasn't a snare on the 2 and the 4. It was a snare on the 2 and then just a tambourine on the 4. So yeah, I think just using more conventional drums, creating a better drum pattern, would have helped this beat feel a lot more full and complete. I think that was just the one thing that really hurt this beat. I will say the low end sounded a bit odd at times. Not sure whether the 808 was used in an entirely different octave than what it was supposed to. There were moments when the bass note reached a very strange place, but overall I think it was just the drum textures were just not used correctly in terms of not having a clap or a snare on the 2 and the 4, and beyond that they were not loud enough and ended up sounding very secondary in the beat. So yeah, with hip hop, drums are typically the sound that you want to be up front and very prominent. It's not like a soft rock or anything where the drums are a little bit more secondary in the back. In hip hop, you want them to be aggressive and upfront, so make sure your levels reflect that. But overall, Dash D is really love the core loop that was built here. That showed a lot of skill, so I'm interested to hear more of Dash's beats going forward, because this challenge required you to make everything on your own, and I think if you made that from scratch, that's very impressive. Here we go, guys. Football starts in half an hour, so I'm gonna have to hop off. Geisha, congratulations. She submitted this beat called, what's it called? 925. right, that was Geisha's beat 925. Geisha's in the chat. Welcome, Geisha. Perfect timing for showing up. Deleg asked to see this actual spreadsheet, so I might as well share it with you guys. I don't see why not. Just don't make any changes, obviously. Yeah, let's stick to viewer. So none of you rascals can make changes, because that was what was happening last time. So I pasted it in the assignment sign up section, so you can take a look at all the beats, listen to them on your free time if you'd like. So Immorts had to go. Good to see Amori. Damn, I really love the melodic instruments in here. Not sure about, is my mic on? It is on. Not sure about the bass presence though. Yeah, the bass is off, says Geisha. I don't know if it's because my AC is on the right of me, but during the hook, the bounce seems a bit off and heavy. I really like the core instrumental, says Joe. The second snare sounds a little weird though. I really like the kick, quite unique compared to the normal trap kicks. There is one sound that comes in randomly that I'm falling in love with. It's like a brassy synth or something. I think the drums could be a bit more separated from the rest. They blend in a bit, but very cool overall. So yeah, I think with Geisha's beat here, one of the things that makes me very happy to see is that she's getting more comfortable using more and more transient sounds in terms of building out the actual core loop. So what we talked about, what beat was that? I think it was Z Elite's beat. Yeah. In terms of using these huge sustained sounds to fill up space in your beat. And what ends up happening is that it becomes a struggle to add different types of sounds because you're dependent on this huge sound to be the sort of POI. And I challenged Geisha to step away from that and move towards more transient sounds to build out her beats. And I think she's showing a lot of progress in regards to that. It can be a little bit more difficult to come up with like a more melodic pattern and choose good sounds and textures. But with, for example, the very plucky instrument that Geisha used, I think it sounded great. The textures and sounds overall sounded really, really awesome and unique, which is a staple of Geisha's beats. One of the things that jumped out to me was, I'm not sure whether this is intentional, but nonetheless, I'll sort of walk through my thinking here. If you feel that when you make your drum patterns, it doesn't really have a cohesive feeling, which to me, that's what sort of jumped out about this beat. So for instance, there was a clap on the 2, I think, and a snare on the 4. The kicks were very, very colorful and jumped out. And the hi-hats were extremely, extremely short and transient. And it sort of ended up sounding like a bit of a mishmash of different types of textures that didn't really have much of a cohesive bond in between them, just because the sort of aesthetic characteristics felt very different. So a very obvious way to change that is, put a consistent sound on the 2 and the 4 instead of using different sounds. You might want to layer, that clap every 4th snare hit. But nonetheless, I think adding a little bit more consistency there is one thing. What I often find is that these more colorful kicks are somewhat more useful for like EDM if you have like just a thumpy kick that you need to really bring out that brightness. I feel for hip hop though, these types of brighter kicks can get in the way of building cohesive drum patterns because they provide so much color that it becomes hard to create a consistency between that and the other textures. So what I often like to do when I have a texture like this that has the right thump that I need but ends up adding way too much color is that I will bring an EQ in and really start to shave off a lot of those higher frequencies. And what ends up happening is you're just left with a lot of thump but not much color. And then I'll bring in a very colorful and more prominent hi-hat. So you guys heard in this beat, the hi-hat was very, very short, very, very transient. So I'll replay it so you can hear. So what I do is by shaving off a lot of that highness from the kick, I'll sort of replace it with the actual more prominent hi-hat. And so by layering a kick plus that hi-hat that I like, and then using that hi-hat normally throughout the entire beat, it just feels like it builds a little bit more of a cohesiveness. And then you pair that with a more straightforward snare or clap on the 2 and the 4, you can start to bond the drums a little bit more cohesively with one another instead of having this sort of disparate mishmash of sounds. So if that's something that is not intentional and you want to bring a little bit more cohesiveness to your drums, being more consistent with the textures that are used, and I would say that figuring out ways to sort of fuse the hi-hat with the other textures and sounds. I at times do the same thing with the snares, so I'll just keep more of the body of the snare. Obviously you do need some more higher end with the snare, but I'll sort of make sure that the textures fit well underneath the umbrella of the snare, and I'll shave some of the higher frequencies from the remaining sounds of my drums just so there's that cohesiveness and that hi-hat starts to build a good bond in between every single other drum texture, if that makes sense. So yeah, obviously you guys heard with the kick, it has just a lot of color if you guys didn't pick up on that. But yeah, once again, I really, really love that plucky sound that you used there. And I think as well, towards the end, I got a little bit confused. So what I imagined the arrangement was during the verse, we had this plucky instrument, and then during the hook, we have this larger organ that comes in. I would have liked if this organ was a little bit more secondary and we still kept those plucky sounds, just so we have a little bit more of a traditional arrangement in that we have the core sound, which is that plucky string, and then you add more for the hook to build out a larger feeling, and instead of substituting sounds like you did here. Or again, with the arrangement, it felt a little bit confusing in that this larger sustained sound stayed through the second half of the beat. And so what I'd like to do for the next assignment is make that one of the stipulations of having to come up with a very conventional arrangement, just because it can teach you and force you to be very, very deliberate with your sounds and not just be, avant-garde and say, you know what, I want to build a type of crazy arrangement where I have sounds coming in and out and I don't really care about structure. I think learning structure, I say this a million times, you have to learn the rules before you break them. Learning how to come up with a beat with a conventional structure and then playing around with that format is going to be more important, rather than just from the onset saying, I'm just going to do whatever I want with my arrangement, and then you sort of lack the ability to control your beat in a way that sort of helps create an up and down emotive experience, rather than just a collage of different ideas that might not connect with one another. Really cool progression here, Geisha, in terms of your sound selection, and I'm happy to see that your beats are starting to really, really come together. My next assignment, I'm hoping, helps you take another step in that direction, in terms of the arrangement at least. Now let us spin. We'll probably have enough time for at least 2 more, hopefully. Sven DJ is up next. We haven't had a lot of dramatic spins. We've only had that one. Whoops. I want more dramatic spins. Who got chosen again? What am I doing here? Where am I? Sven DJ. Let's take a listen.
Thank you.
All right, let me just finish my thought here. I just realized what was jumping out to me. Okay. So with this beat, let's see what chat has to say. A little too sparse, a bit quiet on the mix. I like the idea of the bass being the POI, but not having much other instrumentation or pads to fill up the beat. Makes it feel quite empty and thin. Not sure if it's my current listening situation, but it all sounds very low. Something feels empty, a bit minimalistic and repetitive, needs a bit more variation. I think adding a sustain sound into the main loop would help round out this POI too. Did I come in loud as hell? Oh, because the beat was so quiet, you probably turned up the volume. My bad. That's an interesting. Adding a sustain sound into the main loop would have helped round this POI out. It sounded like there actually was a sustain sound, but it's really, really quiet. It sounds like there's a string in here in the back. Where am I here? Oh, so that was, I remember that beat from last time, Sven. Let's go back into the beat. So yeah, a string comes in right here. Wait, did it come in? Am I imagining sounds in here? I don't know, I'm tripping. Say this beat compared to Sven's last beat here, if you guys remember. That beat was a little bit more problematic, so I think it's good to see that there's a little bit more progression made with this beat. Once again, it does sound like a lot of stock sounds are being used here, but I do applaud the use of, or how the multiple layers were programmed in this beat compared to that last one. I think Sven did a great job of not purposely trying to force something overly complex. He had two different sounds in here that were the main driving force. I think he did a great job in terms of creating an overall balance, is what I'll say here. So I think that's great progress. I do feel as though the beat overall was quiet, just like you guys said, but I think that the main culprit here, was that the bass and the progression moved at the same time, so they had the exact same rhythm. So I'll jump back into the beat here. You'll notice that the bass and the chord progression have the exact same pattern. So I think the bass here could have been used to create something a little bit different than what everything else is doing. I think then we would have a good core arrangement in terms of how the loop was constructed, but as of right now, I am happy to see the difference between like that pluck string and the organ sound. That had a good balance, but I think taking your bass line and not just following the root notes of your progression could have been yet another way to add something that helps the beat feel a little bit more rounded out. In terms of Sven's progression here, I think that's a good step forward. I'm not going to bother getting into arrangements and getting your beat to sound loud. Right now I'm just focused on whether there's good core loop construction before we move on to that, and I think this is definitely a good step forward. So I would say for next time, don't treat your bass as if it has to follow the root note of your progression. It's yet another instrument that you can be a little bit more free with. Obviously that doesn't mean you just go crazy and create something wild and out of control. I would recommend following the steps that I talked about in the course in terms of adding complexity to your bass line and doing something a little bit different than what your other instruments are doing. And once again, keeping in mind you want rhythmic and musical balance between all the different patterns. So don't shove ideas into the beat that don't actually work. Be deliberate. So yeah, good step forward, Sven. We'll do one more beat, and then I have to be a degenerate fantasy football gambler and watch football, and then be miserable that my team sucks. That's what I do on Sundays, everyone. That's how I relax. And the last beat is MF Goon. Well done to the Goon. Let's take a listen. And once again, if your beat didn't get heard, you will receive feedback from Cora or Karasama in the coming weeks. So, yeah. A bit of a different type of track here. We have Sorcerer Supreme. Synth wavy type of pop, according to the hashtag there. Obviously not my forte. I don't have that much experience making this type of music. The closest thing that I did was that video game soundtrack. So I'll try my best to give my thoughts here. Synthwave 80s feel to it, says Bobby Lasers. I'm feeling this, says Red Octane. Loving this one, says Joe. I definitely love the musicality and the textures in here. The textures that were used here didn't feel bland at all. I know for a lot of this type of 80s synthwave, I feel like a lot of the times I hear the exact same types of sounds used. I feel like this track here did a good job of doing something that's a little bit different and unique in terms of the actual textures that were used. I think one of the things that jumped out to me though was the lack of depth with this track. Everything was made maximal once again. I think you can take some of those layers in this beat and push them to the back. So for example, the big so I think those strings can be pushed back into the beat a little bit more and played with in terms of using automation to control just how loud they are. Maybe use it as a way to like make your beat sound gradually bigger and use that to control just how the arrangement works. Because this especially sounds very, very loud once everything else comes in. So I definitely do love the bass line here. I love the musicality. Everything sounds great. It's just the balance here was just a little bit off. I would have definitely controlled that very prominent sustained sound in the back. Red Octane did mention something there. I don't have much experience. It felt like something was slightly missing on the low end or just a ton of highs. I love the dotted bass rhythm here and there throughout. So yeah, I think the actual dotted bass that was used here sounded great, but he probably needed to layer something that's a little bit more subby underneath that dotted bass line, just because a lot of times with synth basses, they are categorized as basses, but sometimes they will actually lack the subbier frequencies. So yeah, I think that might have helped as well. But then again, it could just be the kick here. It just did not have the subby frequency. So it's up to Goonie here, what he wants to do in terms of how he wants to bring in the low end to this beat. But yeah, overall, I think a really cool idea here. That was something different. A good note to go out on. Thank you everyone for coming. Once again, if your name is still on this wheel, you will get a beat review from one of the lovely senior Better Beatmaker members. They provide phenomenal feedback, and so don't feel like you've been shortchanged. So yeah, once again, thank you guys for showing up. We'll do our next review stream in 2 weeks, and yeah, thank you guys for coming, and hopefully I'm not too sad after I lose